I live in a small rural community in the eastern United States. It's a nice little town, and because of my work in the medical field, I've met some interesting folks. I'm also familiar with law enforcement and emergency personnel. Small town life is not as dull and uneventful as people think, especially since everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. I have a lot of stories to share, but since this one just happened, I'll start here. Because it's still very recent and the investigation is ongoing, I have to be vague with some details, but I needed to tell someone. I'm single and live alone. Due to a stalker, I've moved twice, but that's another story for another time. However, it is relevant for this story for multiple reasons. The first reason being that I have a dog for the sake of protection, as well as have motion sensors and outdoor security cameras. The second reason being the location of my home, which is literally down the street from the fire department. I can see it from my living room window right now, and a couple of blocks from the police station. However, next to the fire department is the road department, which is basically a parking lot where they park their road equipment and empty garage trucks at night and on weekends. Oddly, it doesn't have a security camera. Small town life, I suppose. My house sits on a hill with a good view of that side of the street. Due to the incline, the large trees in the front yard, and the half cornfield in the property next to me, most people in the street below wouldn't notice me in the backyard unless they were actively looking. However, I can see the street clearly. This incident happened Saturday evening. The county was holding its annual Independence Day spiel with a community barbecue, music, fireworks, etc. I didn't attend because it's just not my thing. Plus, I have a dog and the sound of fireworks could be traumatizing, as I'm sure many of you know. Before the big show, I took the dog out to relieve herself in the backyard. There was still at least an hour of daylight, but the entire neighborhood was pretty quiet because most everyone was at the fairgrounds or various other holiday events. So when an unfamiliar, large white pickup drove slowly down the street, I noticed. It must have turned around at the end of the street because I saw it again, moving in the opposite direction only about 20 seconds later. This time it turned into the parking lot of the road department. Now, people have been known to toss things into the empty garage trucks, usually at night to avoid getting caught, because they don't want to or they're unable to make the trip to the landfill themselves. Usually it's things like furniture or broken equipment, but I didn't see any of those things in the back of this truck. The driver was a somewhat stocky guy of average height. He took 3 large black trash bags from the bed of his truck and tossed them one by one into the hopper of the garbage truck. Then he left. Now, I swear I'm not one of those meddling rear window types who always thinks activity is suspicious and that their neighbors are up to no good, but something about this didn't sit right with me. Normally, when I see people tossing their garbage into the trucks and leaving, I don't bother reporting it because it's relatively harmless. But this time, I had a gut feeling. So I called the police. If anything, they could get the guy for illegally dumping trash from a barbecue or whatever. While I'm on the phone with dispatch, I put my dog inside to cut down on distractions while the officers investigate. A few minutes later, an officer arrived and I crossed the street to meet him, gave him a description of the events, and pointed out which of the trucks the man had tossed the bags. He found the bags, took photos. He put on gloves and told me to stay back. The bags were tied in a knot at the top, and it took him a minute to untie one because of the gloves and how tight the knot was. But eventually he got it open, looked inside for a few seconds, then twisted it closed and took a few steps back. "Dear God," he hissed under his breath. "What?" "It's a body." I felt sick. I could tell he felt sick too. I saw him grow pale. His hand was trembling when he held the radio. Even his voice was shaking as he gave the code to dispatch. The dispatcher sounded confused when she asked him to repeat it. Within 10 minutes, the county sheriff was on the scene. Even he looked sick at the contents of the bag. The coroner arrived about 10 minutes after that, and the first officer walked me back to the house along with another one who arrived at the same time as the coroner. Though I showed the first cop via the app on my phone when I described the events initially, I now showed them the video on a larger screen. The camera caught footage of the truck as it drove by both times, as well as pulling into the parking lot, though unfortunately not a clear view of the license plate or the man tossing the bags out of frame. We watched the footage over and over, pausing frames, the officers taking notes. Ultimately, they requested this footage as well as a copy of the files from the past week to see if the truck had been in the area before. I've also been saving footage until the road department installs their own camera this week. Because this is still fresh, I don't know many more details. I know the body was in pieces, as they said, but I don't know the age of the victim, the gender, cause of death, any of that. Information hasn't been released to the public yet. I don't know if the coroner has ever been able to identify the body yet. A police cruiser has been parked at the fire department next door for constant surveillance in case the guy comes back. The guy who dumped the body was likely a local. How else would he know that he could dump there? He probably thought it'd get buried in other people's illegal trash accumulated over the holiday weekend and the sanitation crew wouldn't have bothered to investigate. When I think about how this guy lives in my community, it makes me physically ill. To think that he had clearly scouted the area for a dump site, that it may not have been the first time this had happened, that this could happen again. If I hadn't called it in, if I hadn't been in the backyard at the exact moment, or if I had ignored that gut feeling, the victim would have never been found, may never find potential justice. Their loved ones may never have closure. In fact, there's a possibility that it might just happen again to another poor soul, and I just hope that it's not me. When I was 19, I was looking for a room to rent in the city I was moving to for college. It was about an hour away from my family. I wasn't having much luck, and my mom started helping me to look for a place. She found an ad on Craigslist for a room for $300 in a house, everything included. The homeowner was a man, and he rented the additional rooms upstairs to other women while he lived in the finished basement. The ad stated he rarely ever saw the other roommates because he had a kitchen and his own entrance downstairs, and that he preferred women because he had issues with male roommates in the past partying and causing damage. We decided to take a look since it was the cheapest that we could find in the area. My mom and I went to the house to view it. Decent house, decent neighborhood. He opened the door and was very welcoming. He was middle-aged, and the kitchen and living room were furnished nicely and clean. My mom loves to talk and to get to know people, so they were engaged in conversation while I stood there quietly and observed the place. He then said that he would show me my room. We head towards the staircase to go up, as I thought, since he said on the phone my room was upstairs with the other roommates, but he opens another door and we follow. He takes us down to the basement and opens the door to a very small room, no closet and no windows. He proceeds to say this is my room and I will be sharing the bathroom in the hallway with him, and his bedroom did not have a door on it. I was definitely thinking absolutely not, this is weird, but they were so deep in conversation that I couldn't interject. He then leads us to the upstairs and shows us the other rooms which the doors were open and said that they were currently rented. He then starts telling us elaborate stories about the other women. Not very nice stories, describing their drinking problems. My mom was listening intently, but I took the time to investigate further. I looked in all 3 rooms and all the bathrooms. There was furniture, but not a single item in there looked like it belonged to a woman. No clothes or anything, only men's clothes in one of the closets. He had no problem with me creeping around his tenant's room without their permission. I then heard him tell my mom that he has some other stuff in their closets, but they don't mind, and I'm just like, why would a tenant pay you for you to use their space as storage? I was feeling really uncomfortable and kind of guided them back downstairs as they talked. My mom had mentioned when we arrived that her and my dad were going on vacation the next week, but I couldn't go because I had to work. He brought it up again and said that I should come by next week and have dinner with him and the roomies to see if we would all get along. I said sure, and we left. As soon as we got in the car, I told my mom that I would definitely not be living there. and she was dumbfounded. I had to explain to her not only did he lie about the room I would be in, that I was not supposed to be in the basement with him as well as share a bathroom with him, and he didn't even have a door, but also, did she not even notice how no one else even lived there? She still didn't get it, and thought that I was just being paranoid and thought he was nice and was a cheap deal. I had to explain it to my stepdad and get him to tell her by no means would I be living there. I tried to report the post, but by the time we got home that day, he removed it. I don't know what he had planned on doing to me at dinner, possibly abducting me and holding me hostage in that basement room that had no way to escape. I just hope that guy hits a tree with his car one day. Now, as an update, some details have been coming back to me since I've been answering all your questions. This happened in 2011, so it's been quite a while. When he took us upstairs, there was a wide landing that was surrounded by rooms. As soon as we go up there, he motions towards one of the rooms and started this long, intricate story about the woman who lived in there and talking about her alcoholism and a crazy ex. He was very exaggerated in how he talked with a lot of gestures. My mom stood there listening to him. I don't know if it was sheer distraction or if she didn't want to be rude not listening, but either way, I don't recall her ever having a good look around those rooms. I went and looked. All the doors were open, had neatly made beds with dark wood bed frames, bureaus with mirrors and nightstands. There were sliding mirror closets and they were empty except for one had men's clothing hanging pushed against one corner. Nothing was on the nightstands other than a lamp and nothing on the bureaus. I went into the bathrooms and there was nothing on the vanity in them other than hand soap. I looked in the showers too, but nothing other than bar soap. The bedroom on the left had an empty suitcase laying open on the middle of the bed. This was one of the rooms with the empty closet. After seeing all this, I came back onto the landing and started slowly heading down the stairs. They were still talking and absent-mindedly followed me down to the living room, and that's when he mentioned dinner and we left shortly after. I think that's why my mom didn't notice a lot and didn't believe me at first. She didn't take more than a quick glance upstairs, and when we were in the basement, he was just as talkative. Now, a commenter here who works with law enforcement pointed out that this was probably a trafficking situation. The bedroom in the basement is where a victim is kept, drugged and abused until broken and then trafficked. I honestly think this was more plausible with the situation, as well as my city is actually a hotspot for that. I'm so grateful we got out of there, and I hope my experience could help someone one day notice the details and get out of the situation safely. Stay safe and blessed, people. I wanted to tell you guys about my mentally unstable neighbor, who I'll be calling Kay to respect her privacy. Because I don't want to call her crazy or anything else that contributes to the stigmatization of severe mental illness, this story isn't going to be exaggerated to be more creepy or anything like that. It's just what happened. We had just moved into our new home, which we had recently built in a town in Texas. It started when my parents began finding small pills strewn about our backyard near the fences, just a few here and there. We Googled the number on the pills and find most of them were antidepressants. But I cannot remember the exact names, as this was about a year or so ago, but I think there was at least one pill that Google said was an antipsychotic medication. We were pretty confused, but mostly worried about our dog eating them before we could find them. This kept happening over a few weeks, and then we found unopened water and Gatorade bottles thrown over our fence. The side of the house this was coming from had a somewhat empty lot next door. We had soon-to-be neighbors building their new house there. But it wasn't like the construction workers were throwing their trash over our fence. These bottles were unopened and full. For reference, Kay lives a few houses down from mine, on the corner. Between our house and hers are 2 empty lots, the lot closest to us with a new house being built there. After another week or so of this came the fights, or maybe incidents I should call them. Kay would routinely storm out of her house and go yell at the construction workers. I don't know what about, but apparently about nonsensical things. Sometimes she would yell from her yard. Sometimes she would walk onto the lot to yell. Several times she was seen yelling at no one, just standing in the lot or walking around the construction supplies and arguing to herself. By now, most of the people on our street knew of her and were kind of afraid of her. Up to this point, I had never seen Kay. I attended university an hour away and was only home on the weekends. One weekend, my parents left me home alone in the middle of the day. I think they were at the gym or the grocery store. I'm an only child, too. I had just gotten out of the shower and walked downstairs to hear yelling. I peek outside the windows to see a middle-aged blonde lady arguing. I couldn't see who she was talking to, but I could hear another male voice. Now, I had not met Kay yet, but I also hadn't met my new neighbors, but my parents had. So my first thought was that this was the new couple building next door, my new neighbors. It seemed like they were arguing about the house. After a few minutes, the blonde lady walks away, and then a couple came out of the unfinished house and they get into their car parked on the street. I'm really confused at this point, especially when the man walks over to my door and rings the doorbell. I'm very introverted, so I opted not to answer the door. Kinda stupid, I know. My parents weren't home anyways, so it wouldn't have made a difference, I thought. After a minute, he walks back to his car, and from the window I can see he is sitting there on the driver's side doing something. He comes back with a note that he leaves on my door, and then he and his wife drive away. After I'm sure they're gone, I get the note and read it. Apparently my neighbors were checking out the house when they saw Kay, the blonde lady, attempting to get into my backyard. They confronted her, and that's what the yelling was about. In a rush, I sent a pic of the note to my mom and called my mother, etc., and she didn't seem that worried about it, but I knew that we always left the back door unlocked during the day. If she had gotten through our fence gates, she could have easily walked inside the house while I was home alone. After that, my stepdad got some new locks for the little gate doors at the front of our house. Things continued like this for a while, with Kay trying to get into our backyard, throwing pills and water bottles over our fence. A couple of times she was rummaging around our front flower beds too. There was one instance which was really unnerving for my parents. We have a small alleyway that runs behind our house, connecting everyone's driveways. Another neighbor, who lives across the alleyway from us, contacted my parents to let them know that they had seen Kay looming around our back fence gate at around 3 a.m. that night. Not sure why those neighbors were awake at that time, but they said Kay was just standing there in the middle of the alleyway, staring at our back fence. Knowing we had someone essentially casing our house in the middle of the night was really starting to freak us out. The guy who built our house, who I called Jay, somehow got in contact with someone who knew Kay's family pretty well. Everyone was wanting answers to why Kay was acting like this, and since Jay had built most of the houses in the area and was well connected, people were asking him. I think he was friends with the realtor who sold the house to Kay, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Jay was able to give us a lot of information about Kay. Apparently her family was rich and owned a very big corporation, like one of the biggest in the United States. I don't want to name it, again, for her own privacy. And her family had essentially placed her in this house away from the rest of them. They didn't want to deal with her mental illness. But more importantly, 2 years ago, her only son died of a drug overdose, and she'd been unstable ever since. The reason why she wants to get into our backyard and keeps throwing stuff over the fence is because she believes her son is in there. Not sure if she thinks we're holding him hostage or his ghost is here or what, but that's why. She's been to several psychiatric hospitals throughout her life, and now she stopped taking her medication because she's throwing it over our fence. Things finally came to a head in January of 2020 when, during one of her usual arguments with the construction workers, she pulls out a BB gun. She's already very aggressive, so the BB gun just made things 100 times worse. I don't know if she just threatened to shoot them or actually did, but the cops were called regardless. It took them a while to talk her down, with several police officers swarming the street with actual guns. I'm thankful that my parents have been filing police reports, so when they showed up, they knew about Kay's history of mental illness. I am both grateful and a little surprised that they handled the situation so well, because not a lot of police departments properly train their officers to deal with mentally ill patients, especially ones experiencing psychosis like this. So anyway, after that incident, Kay was not seen for a long time. We hear she was in a psychiatric hospital for many months, after which she returned to our neighborhood. She's doing much better now. She no longer does any of the strange behaviors that she used to. Almost every day, me and my parents see her walking her dog past our house. She's clearly sticking to her routine, and I'm happy for her. When I was 18, I worked at my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half the third floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with a hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4 AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m., and he said he left his keycard in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary keycard and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or a hotel guest, and he replied, "Student." At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgore. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned not to. Later on in the night, maybe at around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd have to change the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with a master key and told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, "No, it's okay, I'll close it," and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really freaking weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought maybe it was also just a language barrier issue. At this point, though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it. There was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, "I have a key, go get it," and threw it under the bed. He said that there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no. I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at it if anything was broken. I had my back to him and he asked me if I could take off my glasses. I said no, I needed them to see. His tone of voice changed, and in the most steady, chilling manner, he said, "Ella, it's okay. You can take them off." And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and, trying to remain composed, said, "No thanks, I need to keep them on." Even though he was creeping me out, I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit and undid the door deadbolt and opened it up in the process. He jumped toward the door to close it again and told me to keep it closed. I told him no. I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and trying to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focused on getting out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the door frame to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, no shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets on the bed. Nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking that he had just arrived today and hadn't gotten a chance to buy anything yet, but in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed and quickly gathered the door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed. You need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually and told him if the door was broken, I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk, I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down in a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew that he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which had decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. I mean, obviously he didn't. That's why I called you guys crying and terrified. He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there. He couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for a student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove that he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell that he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said across the street. One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months later and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept up the ums and uhs, saying he didn't know. They asked, "Were you trying to see a friend? Did you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know, no reason, I'm just here." At one point he tried to tell them that he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still very insane. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out that room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later, a housekeeper came to the desk and told me that they found the door dead-bolted open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found it. I never saw him again, and to this day I have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter, and overnight shifts still give me the heebie-jeebies. It was a Saturday afternoon. Turning 14 in the summer, my mom decided it would be nice if I could get a head start on my necessary volunteering hours for high school. I've never volunteered before and was quite anxious as I thought I would have to run a stand or do an activity that required some sort of social interaction. I'm normally quite shy, and being in unfamiliar environments with complete strangers puts me even more on edge. My mom thought it would be a good experience to get me out of my comfort zone, but I couldn't bear to think about all the ways I would mess up interacting with people. After browsing the web, we found a local rodeo fair for me to volunteer at. I thought I would be hanging out with cute animals for the day, but boy, how I was wrong. When we arrived, we were told that the event they needed volunteers for was canceled the day before and They forgot to email my mom about it. The nice woman at the counter felt bad that we came all the way out for nothing, so she offered that I could still help out around the fairgrounds for a few hours. My mother thought it would be great that I could still work and said that she would pick me up later. My shift was going to be around 3 hours, and the task I was assigned was sweeping the floors of an old storage house in the back. It was not ideal, but to me it was much better than running a kiosk or something. The supervisor just gave me a broom and left me alone in the storage house to clean. About an hour and a half into sweeping, a man came in from the back entrance. I assumed he was a staff member getting supplies, so I just put my head down and quietly swept. As he walked past me, he asked who I was. "Oh, I'm just helping out. Karen told me to clean up this place." He looked at me for a couple of seconds before responding with, and walking out the front door. He didn't get anything, which I thought was strange, but I thought maybe he was just checking on something. Minutes later, he walked back into the room with his own broom and dustpan in hand and started cleaning as well. My social anxiety kicked in as he began to make small talk with me. He asked me for my name and age and things like that. I lied when I said I was 15, but I don't think he believed me as I am much shorter for girls my age. His questions started to get increasingly more personal, asking things like if I had a boyfriend or liked anyone. Feeling uncomfortable, I dodged the questions with nervous laughter, saying no, and slowly started sweeping towards the exit. He followed me, trying to make it look discreet. As he got closer, I could tell he was way taller than I thought initially, definitely over 6 foot, and looked to be in his mid-40s, going bald, but he had a very robust frame. He swiftly approached me and touched my hair, saying, "I love the blonde ones." Before I could sprint for the exit, he scooped me up under his arms and covered my mouth. I kicked and screamed, but it didn't seem to faze him. I was barely 95 pounds at the time, as he easily carried me through the back entrance to the lot behind. Out of pure luck, that day, or some kind of angel over my shoulder, there happened to be a couple of staff members who were near the back that heard my screaming. They saw the man carrying me to his truck and rushed towards us, running and shouting at him to let me go. The man dropped me to the floor and drove away quickly before they could get his license plate. I was left on the ground in complete shock and shivering as tears were bawling out. The police were called and it became a huge scene. The fair had to close early and my parents were notified of what happened. My mom was furious that they had neglected me and left me alone without any supervision. Apparently the man was not part of the staff. He was just another stranger who was lurking around the fair until he somehow caught a glimpse of me inside the storehouse. I gave the police a description of the man in his vehicle, but horrifyingly enough, they never caught him. It bothers me to this day that he's still out there, doing God knows what. I hope he never found another person to take, as I'm sure he would not let them get away again. For some relevant background info before I begin, when I was in year 8, I became friends with this guy called C from my friend group. We weren't really too close, and eventually he moved to a different school. About a year later, we regained contact and became really close. C lived a 10-minute walk from my house, so I practically spent all my free time at his house. As we grew older, we experimented a lot with alcohol and drugs, which escalated to us drinking alcohol together pretty much every other day. Needless to say, because of this, I completely ruined the relationship I had with my parents, and we had a big trust barrier during this time. My parents absolutely despised C as they thought he was the reason behind me drinking so much at such a young age. During the last year of high school, I had just turned 16, I was struggling a lot with mental health, and C was one of my only friends during this time. I also had a boyfriend that I started dating a month prior to when the story takes place. C was a pretty controlling and judgmental friend, and expressed his hatred for my boyfriend when we started talking, so I thought it was best to keep my relationship to myself. When lockdown got put back into place at around Christmas of 2020, it didn't really stop me and C from hanging out. We were still practically inseparable, and his parents had taken a liking towards me. C would steal money from his parents all the time to buy vodka and beer, and I'm not just talking about a few coins. I mean, he would literally steal 50 notes from his dad's wallet every week just to be able to afford alcohol. We would usually sit and drink near his road, but on this day we decided to go for a walk and sit on a bench outside a supermarket. It wasn't late, but it was already dark since it was January. We were just chilling for a while when this slightly older man approaches us and starts a conversation. He introduced himself as Johnny. Me and C were pretty uncomfortable as we don't really like random people talking to us, but we didn't want to be rude, so we sat and listened to Johnny talk. He was complaining about his wife leaving him and taking the kids as he was a drug addict, and even when he was talking to us, it was clear that he was on something as he kept jittering. He kept the conversation going for about 10 minutes and then says that he's going into the supermarket to buy some food. Me and C say our goodbyes, and we were pretty relieved for that to be over, so we took the opportunity and left, but unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time that we saw Johnny. A few weeks later, it was still locked down, and I remember waking up and going to a few of my online lessons, but overall felt pretty depressed. My parents were fuming with me because I had just gotten my school report, and it really wasn't looking great for me. They said that I wasn't allowed to go out this day, but I was upset and wasn't going to take no for an answer. My mom asked if I wanted to go food shopping with her, to which I said yes. I waited in the car for my mom to do her shopping and texted C that I would go out and see him. He had already bought alcohol, so I told him to save me some. When we got back, I told my mom I wanted to go see my boyfriend. This was a lie, but as I mentioned before, my parents despised C. My mom didn't really say much about it, so I started walking away, but didn't get very far as a few seconds later my dad comes out after me and tells me to get back in the house. I said no, and that I was going out, so he took my phone off of me and left. I had already told C that I was coming and knew where he lived, so I figured I didn't really need my phone anyway. When I got to the street where we would drink, C was already sitting there with a half-empty bottle of vodka sitting next to him. He gave me a hug and we sat down, and he asked me if I was okay. I told him briefly about what happened, but said I just want to forget about my day and have some fun. I finished the bottle of vodka C brought with him, and he said that he wanted to go get some beers. We made our way to the corner shop, which was about 5 minutes from where we were, and got our beers. We were sitting on a small wall behind the shop when we saw Johnny walk past with another guy, and stupidly we said hi to him. Me and C were pretty drunk at this point, so when Johnny and his friend approached us, we started a conversation. Johnny's friend introduced himself as Mark and asked for my age. I lied and said that I was 18, to which he replied, "Oh, that means you're of age, meaning I can do this," as he leaned in and planted a quick kiss on my cheek. I was taken aback by this, but didn't say anything as Johnny interrupted and asked me if I had any change on me. He said that he wanted to go buy weed, and for some reason, me and C thought that having weed would make our night better. Anyway, I only had about 20 coin on me, so I handed it to Johnny. That's when Mark said that he had a friend that lives down the road from where we were who would give him some money and asked if I could go with him. I looked at C and he said that I should go and he will wait here with Johnny for us to come back. Foolishly, I agreed to go with Mark. On the way there, he asked what I was doing out and just said that I had a fight with my parents. Can't really remember what else we talked about, but we didn't walk too far and soon we were at Mark's friend's door. He knocked on it and a few seconds later, a woman answered and said her husband was in the shower, so we should wait outside. We waited for about 15 minutes when his friend came out and sat down. He was talking to Mark about giving him the money and about how they always help each other out. It seemed like they were talking for hours when finally Mark said that we're going back to the shop. His friend said that he would walk back with us, and when we got there, C and Johnny were no longer at the wall we were sitting at. In my head, I was panicking, thinking something had happened to C, and told Mark that I needed to go look for him. Mark asked me to stay and said that he would help me look for C. We approached the corner shop where me and C had bought alcohol, and Mark's friend said that he was going in to buy some beers. He came out, handed me a beer, and said that he was leaving. Him and Mark said their goodbyes, and That's when Mark told me he lived a 20-minute bus ride from where we were and he had a free house. He was about 30, and there was no way that I was leaving with this guy back to his house. I politely said no and that I needed to go look for a friend. He kept insisting, saying that I could stay at his house, and when he realized I wasn't going anywhere with him, he said that he could go talk to C. I had already started walking back to the road C lived on, hoping that he would be there, but didn't want Mark to know where he lived, so I stopped at the end of his road. Mark asked where he lived and kept saying he wanted to go talk to C about me staying over. When I still wasn't budging, he began to pull my arm and try to get me to the bus stop. Thankfully, I saw my mom's car pull up and C was in the car screaming at me to get in. C had apparently called my mom as I had been gone for over an hour. We drove around for a few minutes. The whole time my mom was saying how disappointed she was with me, and we dropped C off at home. She told me I was lucky that she came at just the right moment, and the night could have ended much worse. When I got home, I felt overwhelmed with what had happened that day, and on top of struggling with mental health for months, I tried to end my own life. I ended up in the hospital for the rest of the night, and police officers were questioning me about Mark and Johnny, but said that they couldn't do anything about the situation since I had lied about my age. A few days later, I met up with C, and he told me what happened when I was gone with Mark. Apparently, Johnny asked C to come with him to the supermarket while they waited. In the supermarket, Johnny kept insisting for C to buy him scratch cards, and C agreed, although clearly being extremely uncomfortable. The woman at the till selling the scratch cards noticed this and asked C to provide ID. C took his chance and mouthed, "Help," to the worker, and she called over the security guards who tackled Johnny to the ground and told C to leave the store. C returned to the wall near the corner shop, and when he realized I still wasn't there, he called my boyfriend, who told him to call my mom so they can come look for me. It's been a few months since this happened, but this day will always haunt me. I'm not friends with C anymore, which is probably for the best, but I'm grateful he called my mom that day, because if he hadn't, I don't want to imagine what could have happened to me. One night after my mother, brother, friend, and I, a male who was 13 at the time, were waiting to cross the street when the sketchy-looking male with a hoodie and jeans on started eyeing me down. Now, as a 13-year-old, I didn't quite understand how it worked with respecting where your eyes are supposed to be, but if someone stared me down, I stared right back at them, and this time it came back to bite me. We stared at each other for probably a solid 10 seconds, which felt like 10 minutes in my mind. And when he still hadn't broken eye contact, he said, "What you looking at, son? Keep your eyes off me. I don't like when you look at me like that." Now, me, being the most ignorant, naive, polite 13-year-old ever, apologized for staring at him, and he was still so mad that I chose to stare him down in the first place that he went on to proclaim to everyone around us that if I didn't stop looking at him, which I had already agreed to do, he was going to take a gun out and shoot me, because he was armed. Now, when everyone else heard this, they immediately started moving away from us, and we knew we couldn't do anything, and I genuinely thought that I had just screwed myself by looking at some random dude on the street. In an incredible twist of fate, there happened to be a cop passing by on the other side of the road at the same instance, so my mom jumped into the road. There were no cars coming, luckily, signaled to the cop, and then he came over and searched the man, and it turns out that he was just talking a big game, and he was never actually armed. I always look back on that day and use it as a reminder to never mess with someone that I am not legitimately prepared to mess with in every single way if it comes to that. If life had taken one different turn, I could easily be dead right now, and my innocence and ignorance would be to blame. This was back in 2002. Just for clarification, I am a female and I was 20, just about to be 21, and was working full-time and was at the end of my schooling for the pharmacy technician program. Before you can graduate from the program, you need to complete what they call an externship. This is where you basically have on-the-job training in the field you are going to school for. The school was called Eaton Technical Institute, and they offered programs like medical billing, medical assistant, dental assistant, and pharmacy technician. As I was saying, at the end you have to complete on-the-job training, so I was basically working 2 full-time jobs at this time. Due to that, I tried to have a life and socialize any way I could. So this sometimes involved going out late at night and driving around. I was living with my friend April and her boyfriend. She introduced me to this guy Brian, and let me tell you, I was crushing hard on this dude. He had the hair, he played guitar, and he sang. I was swooning. He didn't have a driver's license or a car or any training, so of course, being a smitten idiot, I would let him drive. What would end up happening is that I would pick him up, and then we would go driving anywhere and everywhere. This is possibly because gas was like 89 cents a gallon. Nope, not lying, it was really that cheap, but that was like 20 years ago. Long time. We ended up going out and driving around so much that we developed a game called This Way, That Way, Shibby. Basically, whenever we came to an intersection to decide which way to go, we would say this way to go left, that way to go right, and shibby was straight. Yes, we did get lost a couple of times, and this was back in the Stone Age before we had cell phones with GPS. My phone was your basic phone with green screen with black text. So, after playing our game of This Way, That Way, Shibby, we ended up at the end of Meridian here in Puyallup, Washington. Once you get to the end of this, you can either go left or right. If you were to go left, you were at the entrance for Mount Rainier National Park. If you go right, you were just heading down a long, dark, and straight road through some super tall trees. Basically, we could only go right. After going down this road for a little while, we decided to pull over and look at the stars. You can't get this kind of darkness in the city. The stars were drowned out by the artificial light. The sky was amazing out here. So we pull over, and my cousin is with us as well, and I lie on the hood of the car, and I'm loving the sky and taking it in. When Brian all of a sudden yells, "Oh my God, get in the car, now, hurry, hurry." Now, Jess and I practically pee our pants and break a leg trying to get in the car as fast as we can, speed off once we're in, and we're just laughing, saying that was amazing. You guys should have seen your faces. "Oh, F you, dude, that was messed up," I tell him. He just says, "Yeah, you know it was funny." It really wasn't. We're continuing down this road for a little while, and then it starts to curve to the left, and we see a street light. Now, this road had 0 street lights until now, and literally no house. And under this street light, there's an old school station wagon just chilling under it. Just sitting there, illuminated by the street light as if to say, "Hey, come and look at me." Which my cousin, in one of her brightest moments, suggests we turn around here, since we're looking for somewhere to turn around anyway, so she can check out the station wagon. Because we got closer, we noticed that there was a tarp hung all around the inside of the car. And in the process of turning around, we actually end up somewhat behind it. As we pull up alongside it, we see that there is a bullet hole in the very back window. Upon noticing this, my cousin has another brilliant idea and actually wants to get out and look at the car and see if there was a body or something in it. I am totally against this and say, "Let's just go," but she is stubborn and wants to see. So we park next to it and she gets out, tiptoeing up to the deathmobile, and notices something red on the tarp inside. I'm in the car saying, "Come on, Jess, let's just go." She tells me, "Just 1 sec, I want to see." And Brian again, "Jess, come on, get in the car now." And we're screaming at her at this point. She finally gets in, and he takes off so fast that her feet literally are dragging outside the car. I'm like, "Dude, are you serious again?" And he tells us that he is serious this time, and that he actually saw the tarp move. And he swore he saw a face peek out and look at us. I really don't doubt that there was someone in there. It was so weird, so surreal. I wish I had a camera, because this tarp was all around the inside of the car, and then the bullet hole, and the red substance. It was just adding up all to a freaky finale. I wish that we could have gone back to see if it was still there, or to see in the daytime, but we didn't. I think that this was actually one of the last times we went out driving like that, to be honest. In 1999, I was 7 years old, playing in the woods with my friend Charlotte. We were standing at each end of a big log in the woods when I noticed movement in my peripherals. I tried focusing on my periphery to catch a detailed look. I see similar movement often when we're in the woods, and it always disappears, or more like scatters, before I turn to look. My heart skipped a beat when I could make out a group of little people looking at me as well. I was frozen in the pose I was playing in, and after a few seconds I realized Charlotte had stopped narrating out our play and was frozen in place as well, staring at me but focusing on them. I'm pretty sure they were dressed because it didn't look like they were all naked. I could tell they knew that we were aware of them, and they disappeared as Charlotte moved her eyes. We didn't talk about it until we were in her house. We weren't afraid, just confused on our walk home. We wrote out what we saw before talking about it to see if we saw the same thing. Unfortunately, both of our descriptions were so vague, but clothed less than a foot for sure. One thing we were positive of was to mind our business and to not go searching, which is what our instincts would have usually been. We thought we found a colony of little people in the woods, but the fact that our reaction was to quietly leave and not even talk about it until behind closed doors, and still not even talk about it out loud but write it, I don't remember being too frightened. In fact, we kind of just accepted it and moved on with a new taste of what this world and universe is capable of. I watched The Indian in the Cupboard later in life, which reminded me of those little people, but I no longer saw them by then. Charlotte and I would talk about seeing things out of the corner of our eyes, but could never figure out what it was. Although Charlotte was different, her and her dad were huge hippies, tire swing in the kitchen, no TV, and her imagination was so wildly magnificent that it made my mind radiate. I always thought that maybe her narration of our play was so powerful and energetic that we could manifest and see the same thing. Little people were never playing any parts in either of our imaginations. In fact, when we both confirmed what each other saw, we were kind of in awe that we'd never even dreamt of tiny people in this universe. This is the story of my mom and how she died. This may differ as it was only scary to me because I didn't know what happened. If you're a parent reading this and have any thoughts of taking your own life, seek professional help because my mom's death has messed me up for the rest of my life. For some context, my mom had been dealing with drug addiction for well over a decade at this point. Her and my dad had me in 2004, but shortly divorced about 2 years afterwards, so it was just us and the occasional boyfriend. I had a tendency to wander off and explore the neighborhood when she was passed out drunk, which ended up getting me grounded. Eventually, it got so bad that she eventually gave my grandma, her mom, joint custody of me, and I was 6 years old at the time. It was January 7th, 2012 that things all took a turn for the worst. I had gone to visit her for that weekend. We were late because my grandma was finishing up work. The first red flag that something bad had happened was that her boyfriend answered the door. She was always the person to answer the door. He told us that she was napping and would soon be up. It was 3 p.m. 5 p.m. rolled around and I ended up making the biggest mistake of my life. I went into her room and there, I saw her body. The gun was on her chest. I stupidly didn't question it because I didn't know what death was. I left the room and continued waiting in the living room. 6:45 rolled around and her boyfriend checked on her. The next thing I saw was him bolting out of the room and running outside. The police showed up 15 minutes later and so did my family. I was questioned by the detective about how I saw her. I was taken out of the house to my family, who were all crying. I was told that she was dead. It set in that something bad had happened not long after and I ended up going into shock. I started living with my grandma full time. I saw therapy and just kind of accepted that she was dead. To tell a 7-year-old that they would never see their mom again is probably the hardest thing you could do. So please, if you have children and are struggling mentally, think of how it could affect them because I'm now a stoner and Can't have a stable romantic relationship because my mental state was destroyed so badly from this. You aren't alone. There will always be people who will listen to you. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All the links down below. Thanks so much, friend. And I'll see you again soon.